Captain Rachel Rage Grayson paced the war room, her boots clicking sharply on the cold floor. Earth had come a long way since the first tentative steps into space. The United Earth military was a force to be reckoned with, boasting cutting-edge ships, advanced artificial intelligence, and military strategies designed to repel any would-be invaders. But this was different. Rachel couldn't shake the tension building in her chest. A routine diplomatic summit had suddenly escalated into a nightmare. She had been there, on the outskirts of the meeting, when the Earth ambassador, an overly ambitious diplomat named Marcus Vaughn, had spoken out of turn. The Ivrian Empire, a race of technologically superior aliens, had been edging closer to Earth's borders for months, but nothing that could be deemed aggressive. The border skirmish had been nothing more than a territorial misunderstanding. The Ivrians were known for their pride, and they were as territorial as they were powerful. But instead of de-escalating the situation, Marcus had pushed too far. With a mixture of frustration and arrogance, he had accused the Ivrians of trying to claim Earth's resources. He had called it a declaration of war. Rachel remembered the silence that followed. Everyone had turned to look at the Ivrians, specifically Empress Talnara, who sat on the other side of the table, regal and unwavering. The air seemed to thicken as she met Marcus's gaze, her cold blue eyes narrowing with every passing second. There was no room for negotiation. Her empire was built on conquest, and she had never been known for mercy. "I believe you've made a grave mistake, Ambassador Vaughn," Talnara had said, her voice cold as ice, but each word laced with venom. "You have no idea what you've just provoked." Rachel had tried to intervene, stepping forward to calm the situation, but it was already too late. The words were out there. The Ivrians were not ones to back down from a challenge. Without warning, Talnara rose from her chair, and her voice rang out across the chamber like a death knell. "You've just declared war on the Ivrian Empire. May your species learn the price of that decision." The room had gone dead silent. Rachel's stomach churned as she watched Talnara leave with her entourage. She had always known the Ivrians were ruthless, famous for their ability to crush their enemies with swift and brutal precision. But this felt different. It was personal. The Ivrians didn't just want to win. They wanted to annihilate. Rachel turned to the team of officers standing around the table. The faces of her fellow commanders were pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. This was the moment that would define them all. "We have no choice now," Rachel said, her voice hardening as her military training kicked in. "Prepare for war. We'll need every ship, every soldier, and every resource at our disposal. Earth will not go down without a fight." But as she spoke, a bitter thought gnawed at her. They were preparing for war with an enemy who had mastered it for centuries. The Ivrian Empire wasn't just a power to be feared. They were a force of nature. Earth was small, inexperienced, and vastly outmatched. And as the fleet commanders left to begin preparations, Rachel couldn't help but feel the weight of the words echoing in her mind. Asterisk, you've just declared war on the wrong species, asterisk. The next few days were a blur of frantic strategy meetings, briefings, and sleepless nights. The news of Earth's declaration of war had spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and humanity's place in the galactic order seemed to tremble on the precipice of annihilation. Even as Earth scrambled to prepare for the inevitable assault, something else loomed ominously: the Ivrian response. The Ivrians didn't waste time. Rachel stood on the observation deck of the U.S. Vanguard, Earth's largest warship, staring out into the abyss of space. The vastness of it was overwhelming, yet all she could focus on was the image of the Ivrian fleet forming just outside Earth's orbit, like a gathering storm. The Ivrian Empire had an almost mythical reputation for their swift and deadly military tactics, but it was one thing to hear about it, and another to see it firsthand. It was something Rachel never truly understood until now. The Ivrian warships were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They were sleek and black, their hulls reflecting the coldness of space as though they had been carved from the very fabric of the void. They were massive, far larger than any ship Earth had ever built, each one carrying an army of genetically enhanced soldiers capable of feats that defied belief. In the distance, the Ivrian flagship, the Vengeful Star gleamed with an otherworldly menace. Even at this distance, Rachel could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on her. The Ivrians didn't communicate through messages or offers of diplomacy. They simply arrived, a silent force ready to destroy. The message was clear. You've declared war, and now you'll feel the consequences. Captain, came the voice of Lieutenant Mara Hawkins, interrupting Rachel's thoughts. They've started moving in. Rachel turned to face the young officer, her expression unwavering. What's the status of our fleet? Admiral Blake is preparing the defensive perimeter, but the Ivrians are out of our league, Captain. They've already breached our outer defenses. Rachel clenched her fists, trying to control the growing frustration inside her. Humanity had always prided itself on its ingenuity, its creativity, its ability to overcome overwhelming odds. But in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. The Ivrians were no ordinary enemies. They were gods of war, honed over centuries of conquest. The latest intelligence reports revealed the horrifying truth. The Ivrians had fought wars longer than Earth had existed. They didn't just win. They obliterated their enemies, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. The first shockwave hit Earth's outer atmosphere before Rachel could respond. A sudden jolt rattled the Vanguard as it shook violently from the force of a Ivrian ship's plasma bombardment. Outside, a fleet of smaller Ivrian ships descended, their weapons lighting up the sky. Earth's defense shields flickered under the relentless assault, struggling to maintain their integrity. Rachel slammed her hand on the console in front of her, her anger boiling over. Deploy all interceptors. Target the lead ship. We can't let them break through. Her orders were met with a flurry of activity as the crew scrambled to implement her commands. Small, sleek fighter ships launched from the Vanguard streaking into space to meet the Ivrian onslaught. The first volley of laser fire lit up the dark expanse of space as human ships fought tooth and nail to fend off the overwhelming Ivrian fleet. Despite their best efforts, the human forces were like gnats against a juggernaut. Earth's interceptors were quickly destroyed, one by one, falling to the Ivrians' superior technology and firepower. It didn't take long for the Vengeful Star to make its move. The flagship unleashed a devastating volley, obliterating one of Earth's space stations in a single strike. The explosion rocked the Vanguard and alarms screamed in every corridor. Shields at 30%, yelled Mara as the deck shuddered beneath them. We can't hold out much longer. Rachel's mind raced. Earth's forces were being decimated faster than she'd ever imagined. But even as her crew scrambled to salvage what they could, she realized something. This wasn't just about winning. The Ivrians weren't looking for a victory. They were playing with their food testing Earth, taunting them. The first few blows had been deliberate, controlled. They were letting humanity experience the power of their wrath before they truly unleashed it. And that realization cut deeper than any weapon could. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting against an enemy that viewed them as nothing more than an inconvenience, a species so beneath them, they didn't even see the need to destroy them all at once. They would break Earth's spirit first, and then, when the planet had been made to bow, they would finish the job. Rachel took a deep breath, turning back toward the viewport, her mind now clearer. She couldn't fight this war the way they had fought the others. The Ivrians were too strong, too advanced. Earth would need to outthink them, outmaneuver them. It was no longer about firepower. It was about survival. And humanity's greatest weapon was its ingenuity. She glanced back at her crew, her voice cutting through the chaos. Get me Admiral Blake. We're going to have to be smarter than them. The war had barely begun, and already Earth was on the defensive. The Ivrian Empire, with its superior technology and military prowess, was relentless. Rachel had seen many battles in her career, but nothing like this. This wasn't a fight for territory or resources. It was a one-sided slaughter, and Earth was losing. Fast. The Vanguard had barely escaped the last Yvrian barrage intact. With Earth's defenses faltering, Rachel convened an emergency war council in the ship's command center. Officers sat around a large holographic map of the galaxy, their faces grim as they reviewed the latest intel. The Yvrians were closing in on Earth's moon, Titan, a key military base, and the thought of losing it sent a wave of anxiety through the room. "We can't keep up like this," Commander Jenkins, the head of strategy, said with a pained expression. "Our ships are too slow, and our weapons systems are barely scratching their hulls. They're too fast, too powerful. We'll be overwhelmed if we don't change course." Rachel's eyes were fixed on the map. She refused to look away, even though she could feel the weight of defeat pressing down on her chest. "How long until they reach Titan?" 3 hours, Captain. "Maybe less," Jenkins replied, her voice tight. Rachel exhaled slowly. The Vanguard had already taken a hit to its main reactor, and the damage was spreading. They couldn't afford another battle. They needed a solution. Fast. But with every passing minute, the odds seemed to grow steeper. "Have you heard from the Cavalry yet?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a moment of silence as everyone in the room exchanged uncertain glances. The Cavalry, an ancient alien race that had remained neutral in galactic conflicts for millennia, had reached out to Rachel only days after the Yvrian declaration of war. They had offered their assistance, though with conditions that were vague at best. "I've been trying to make contact, but there's been no response," Lieutenant Hawkins said, her fingers flying over her console. "Their ships are still in orbit around the outer colonies. I don't think they're ready to intervene." Rachel ran a hand through her hair, frustration building. "We don't have time to wait for the Cavalry to decide if they're going to help us. We need something now." Her mind raced, trying to think of anything that might give Earth a fighting chance. The Yvrians, with their enhanced soldiers and advanced ships, fought with a ruthless efficiency that left little room for error. Every battle seemed like a foregone conclusion before it even began. Their warships were fast, their weapons devastating, and their leadership was brilliant. Empress Talnera was a master tactician, and her military was as disciplined as it was merciless. "We need to outthink them," Rachel said suddenly, her voice sharper than before. "We can't beat them head-to-head, but we don't have to. We need to use the one thing they've underestimated, the human ability to adapt and innovate." "Adapt how, Captain?" Jenkins asked, a skeptical eyebrow raised. "Guerrilla tactics," Rachel replied. "The Yvrians are used to fighting wars of attrition. They conquered worlds for centuries. They expect their enemies to stand and fight, face to face. But what if we don't give them that? What if we force them to chase us, to play our game, not theirs?" There was a long pause in the room as the officers absorbed her words. Slowly, Rachel's strategy started to take shape in their minds. They couldn't match the Yvrians' firepower, but they didn't need to. They could outmaneuver them, hit them where it hurt, and force them to waste time hunting down humanity's scattered forces. "Prepare a new set of orders for the fleet," Rachel commanded. "We're going to hit and run, sabotage their supply lines, and use stealth tactics. We'll blend in with the environment, stay mobile, and wear them down. We'll make them question their superiority." Commander Jenkins nodded, the spark of hope returning to her eyes. "It's risky, Captain. If they catch on, they'll obliterate us." Rachel met her gaze with cold resolve. "Then we'll keep them guessing. We'll strike fast, hit harder, and keep moving. The Yvrians think they know us, but they don't. We're not going to fight them in the way they expect." The room hummed with energy as the officers began implementing the new plan. As they worked, Rachel couldn't help but wonder, was this enough? Were Earth's tactics truly up to the challenge, or was she simply buying time for the inevitable? But she had no other choice. Earth's future depended on this, on humanity's ability to think beyond brute force, to adapt, to surprise. And if they could do that, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of this war. Rachel stood on the bridge of the Vanguard watching the chaos unfolding across the stars. The Ivrians were relentless, their warships swarming like predatory insects, tearing through Earth's defenses with terrifying ease. Every hour that passed brought more reports of destruction. Another station lost, another fleet shattered. Earth was beginning to buckle under the weight of the invasion. But Rachel wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The strategy of guerrilla warfare had begun to yield small successes. A hit-and-run attack on a Ivrian supply station on Mars had crippled their logistics for a time, and several recon ships had returned with crucial intel on Ivrian troop movements. But these victories were fleeting. The Ivrians were learning quickly, adapting to humanity's tactics. Soon, they would be cornered, and Earth's options would run dry unless something changed. The message from the Calorie came like a whisper in the dark. It was unexpected, a subtle shift in the tide that Rachel barely dared to believe. For weeks, she had attempted to establish contact with them, but the ancient alien race had remained silent. The Calorie were enigmatic, known for their knowledge of advanced technology and their ability to manipulate time and space in ways humans could barely comprehend. If they decided to intervene, it would be humanity's best chance to turn the war. Rachel entered the communications room, her eyes scanning the alien symbols flashing across the screen. This time, the message was clear. "We have watched," the Calorian voice said, their voice reverberating with an otherworldly cadence. "We have seen the conflict that unfolds, and we believe there is potential in your species. But you must prove your worth." The ambassador's image materialized on the screen, a figure that seemed to shift between forms, fluid and ghostly. They were the epitome of alienness, humanoid yet not quite, with a presence that felt both distant and intimate at the same time. "Prove our worth," Rachel echoed, her heart pounding. "How do you expect us to do that?" The Calorie's voice softened. "By showing us your resolve. Your species has an uncanny ability to adapt, to improvise under pressure. Your creativity, your will to survive. These are things we wish to test." Rachel's mind raced. What did they mean by testing? This wasn't the time for philosophical games. They needed help. Now. "Tell us what you need from us," Rachel demanded, her tone firm. "We're fighting for our survival. Earth can't stand much longer under this onslaught. We need your technology, your insight, and we need it now." The envoy tilted its head, as if considering her words. The silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. "We will grant you what you seek," it said at last, "but only if you complete a task of our choosing. You will retrieve an artifact from the Ivrian homeworld. It is hidden deep within their most sacred temple. Only by acquiring this artifact will we aid you." Rachel's stomach clenched. This was not what she expected. The Calori were known to possess knowledge that could turn the tide of any war, but their demands had always been cryptic and dangerous. A mission to the Ivrian homeworld would be a suicide mission. But without hesitation, she nodded. "We accept," she said, her voice unwavering. "Give us the coordinates." Hours later, Rachel was aboard the Vanguard's flagship, briefing her best officers on the Calori's proposal. The plan was risky, bordering on madness. A strike team would infiltrate the Ivrian capital, located on their homeworld, Viroxia. There, they would locate the artifact, a piece of technology so advanced that it was said to possess the power to shape the future. It was hidden in a temple at the heart of Viroxia's capital city, surrounded by Ivrian guards, traps, and technologies designed to deter any who dared trespass. "The Ivrians will be on full alert once they detect us," Commander Jenkins said, eyeing the map with concern. "This is a one-way trip. If we fail, the war could be over for us." Rachel glanced at the map as well, her mind spinning with potential outcomes. We don't have a choice. The Kalori are the only ones who can turn the tide in our favor. This is our best shot. They needed to be smart. Stealth would be their ally. The Uvrians were lethal, but they had never faced an enemy like this, a human force willing to do anything to survive. We leave in 2 hours, Rachel said. Prepare the team. We're about to bring the fight to them. As the ship's crew scrambled to prepare for the mission, Rachel found herself standing alone for a moment, staring out at the stars. The weight of the upcoming mission felt heavier than anything she had faced before. They were about to venture into the heart of the enemy's power. But this was no longer just about Earth's survival. This was about proving that humanity wasn't just a race to be discarded, it was a force to be reckoned with. And Rachel was going to make sure the Uvrians realized that, one way or another. The Vanguard drifted through the blackness of space, hidden behind the gravity well of a nearby asteroid belt. The stealth system was working, at least for now. Rachel stood in the ship's command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of Viroxia, the Uvrian homeworld. The coordinates from the Kalori were precise, and despite the gravity of the situation, there was a sharp clarity in Rachel's mind. This was it, the mission that would either save Earth or doom it. All systems are green, Lieutenant Hawkins reported from the tactical station. We're still under the Uvrian radar. The outer defenses of Viroxia are tight, but we should be able to slip in undetected. Rachel nodded but didn't say anything. She wasn't so sure. The Uvrians had near-perfect detection systems, and their capital was a fortress, a city built on centuries of military might and technological superiority. But they were betting everything on the fact that they wouldn't be expecting a small, stealthy strike force, not when they had superior warships in orbit. "This is our only shot," Rachel said, her voice steady, but filled with an urgency that matched the moment. "We're going in, no turning back. Once we're on the surface, we need to move fast. The artifact is inside a temple at the heart of the capital. After that, we make our exit." Jenkins, who had been tasked with leading the infiltration team, looked up at Rachel. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed the tension. "I don't need to remind you, Captain. If we get caught, the Uvrians won't just kill us. They'll make an example of us. Earth's resistance will be crushed." Rachel's eyes met his. "We're not going to get caught." The shuttle dropped silently toward the surface of Viroxia, its heat shields glowing faintly against the planet's atmosphere. Inside, Rachel, Jenkins, Lieutenant Hawkins, and a hand-picked team of soldiers sat in tense silence. The comms were silent, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the shuttle's engines as they glided closer to the city below. The Uvrians had created their capital like a monument to war, massive towers that rose like jagged peaks into the sky, adorned with sharp lines and flowing, symmetrical patterns that spoke of a civilization obsessed with strength. In the distance, Rachel could see the temple, a towering structure that seemed to defy the very landscape, perched at the heart of the city. The shuttle's AI pinged, and the ship's pilot spoke up. "We're entering the restricted zone. Activating cloaking systems now. We have 5 minutes before the Uvrian sensors start scanning for anomalies." "Understood," Rachel said, bracing herself as the shuttle began its descent into the heart of Viroxia. The cloaking system was their only chance. If it failed, they would be spotted in an instant. The shuttle's landing gear finally made contact with the ground, soft but firm, settling silently onto a rooftop. The city below was alive with activity, patrolled by Uvrian soldiers who seemed to be everywhere. Rachel glanced around at her team, their faces grim but focused. They'd trained for this. They'd prepared for every worst-case scenario they could think of. But the truth was, they had no idea what they were walking into. All they had was their wits, their weapons, and each other. "Move out," Rachel ordered, her voice a quiet command that carried through the tense atmosphere. "Stick to the shadows. And remember, we're here for the artifact. Get in, get out. No heroics." The team moved swiftly, their boots making little sound as they crept across the rooftops, moving like ghosts. The city of Iroxia was a maze of tall structures, with narrow streets and towering spires that seemed to twist upward toward the heavens. As they approached the temple, Rachel could feel the weight of its presence, an imposing structure of dark stone, ancient and ominous. Guards stood at every entrance, their armor glinting under the harsh artificial lights of the city. "We need to get inside without being detected," Jenkins murmured, his eyes scanning the area. "There's no way we'll fight our way through those guards." Rachel's mind worked quickly. "We'll take the underground routes. The old catacombs. They should give us access to the temple's lower levels. Hawkins, you're with me. Jenkins, take the rear. We move fast and quiet." The team nodded in agreement, and they shifted direction, heading toward an alleyway that led underground. As they descended into the darkness, the sound of Ivrian patrols grew distant, and the weight of the air shifted. The catacombs beneath Iroxia were a labyrinth of tunnels, and navigating them would be tricky. They had no time to waste. Every second brought them closer to discovery, and to the wrath of the Ivrians. The journey through the tunnels was perilous, the walls tight and oppressive, but Rachel's team pushed forward, their steps measured and deliberate. As they neared the temple's lower entrance, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, observed by something beyond the Ivrian sentries. The artifact was close, but so were their enemies, and as the dark passageways opened into the temple's inner sanctum, Rachel knew the real challenge was just beginning. The air in the catacombs beneath Iroxia was thick and musty, the walls slick with condensation, as if the very stones of the ancient city were alive with secrets. Rachel's footsteps were almost soundless against the cold stone floor as they moved deeper into the maze of tunnels, the flicker of dim lights casting long shadows on the walls. The weight of the mission pressed on them like an invisible force, but they had come this far, and they weren't turning back. Ahead of them, Jenkins led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the passage. Hawkins, ever the calm and calculated tactician, kept her focus on the rear, ensuring they weren't being followed. Rachel could feel the tension in the air, a strange electric hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The Ivrians were everywhere, but they were good at staying hidden, waiting, watching, as predators do. "How far are we?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible, cutting through the silence. "Another 100 meters," Jenkins replied quietly, his voice steady despite the pressure. "The temple's right on the other side of these tunnels." They pressed on, moving with a sense of urgency that was tempered by the need for absolute silence. A single mistake could expose them, and the Ivrians would not hesitate to wipe them out. They were too advanced, too deadly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of navigating the dark, they reached a large, imposing door at the end of the passage. The door was old, covered in intricate alien carvings, its surface gleaming with an eerie otherworldly glow. This was it, the entrance to the temple, where the artifact was hidden. Rachel motioned for the team to halt, and they gathered around her in the shadows, crouched low. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to move fast. Once we're inside, stay close. We don't know what kind of defenses they've set up inside the temple, but we can't afford to be discovered," she instructed in a low voice. "Understood," Hawkins replied, her face tense with concentration. With a soft hiss, Jenkins activated the door's unlocking mechanism. It opened with a creak, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The air inside was thick with the smell of incense, and something else, something almost primal. The room was lined with towering statues of ancient Ivrian warriors, their eyes seeming to follow every movement, as though alive with some dark energy. The walls were adorned with strange hieroglyphs, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light that illuminated the path forward. The temple was vast, its ceiling stretching high into the shadows above, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which the artifact lay. But Rachel's relief was short-lived. "Trap," Jenkins muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. "This place, it feels wrong." Rachel's instincts flared. She wasn't sure what he meant, but there was something unsettling about the atmosphere, like the very space itself was waiting for them to make a mistake. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was wrong, more than just the usual tension of a high-stakes mission. Suddenly, the room was bathed in light, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the chamber. It was the voice of an ancient power, unmistakably Ivrian. "Intruders," the voice said, its tone cold and implacable. "You dare enter the sacred heart of Phyroxia. You seek the artifact, but it is not for you. You are beneath us." The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the shadows themselves shifted. Rachel's heart raced. The temple was alive, and it wasn't just a structure. It was a trap designed to protect something far more valuable than any relic. "Stay alert," Rachel hissed, instinctively pulling her team into defensive positions, but there was no way to predict what would come next. They'd been set up. Before anyone could react, the floor beneath their feet shuddered, and a series of heavy metal doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the chamber. The walls lit up with an ominous red glow, and the ground trembled as something massive began to stir beneath the surface. "Get to the artifact," Rachel shouted. "Now." The team dashed forward, but as they neared the pedestal, the air around them crackled with energy, and a series of sharp, mechanical whirs filled the room. From the shadows emerged the Ivrian guards, huge, imposing warriors, their bodies clad in dark armor that glinted with the same strange energy that radiated from the walls. They were enhanced, biologically and technologically, stronger and faster than anything the team had encountered. One of the warriors raised a long, jagged blade, the energy humming ominously. The others moved in sync, their eyes fixed on Rachel's team with lethal intent. "Protect the artifact," Rachel ordered, her hand tightening around her weapon. There was no choice now but to fight. The first Ivrian warrior charged, a blur of motion, and the sound of his blade slicing through the air was deafening. Rachel ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike, and fired. The shot hit the warrior's chest, but it barely made a dent. These creatures were built for war, and nothing about them was easy to kill. Another warrior lunged at Jenkins, who barely managed to block the attack, his combat suit's energy shield flaring. Hawkins fired a precise shot into one of the enemy's weak points, taking down a guard, but it didn't stop the rest from advancing. The room erupted into chaos as the team fought back, their weapons blazing. The stakes had shifted. The artifact was no longer just a tool for victory. It had become their only hope for survival. They had to secure it, or they would all die here, in the heart of the Ivrian capital. The clash of metal on metal reverberated through the temple's massive chamber, the sound sharp and unforgiving. Rachel's breath came in short gasps as she fought to hold her ground, her pulse racing with every swing of her weapon. The Ivrian warriors were unlike anything they had faced before, enhanced, fast, and ruthless. Each blow they struck sent a jolt of energy through her body, her shield flickering in protest. It wasn't enough. She barely managed to dodge a wide arc of a massive sword swung by one of the guards, the blade grazing her side and sending a searing pain through her ribs. She gritted her teeth, focusing on keeping her footing. They couldn't afford to slow down now. "Move," Rachel shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get to the artifact. It's our only chance." Jenkins, already battered from a previous strike, nodded and pressed forward, using his energy pulse rifle to keep a group of Ivrian warriors at bay. Hawkins covered their backs, her sniper rifle sending precise shots into weak points in the armor of the guards. But the Ivrians were adapting. They were learning. The pedestal was close now, standing like a beacon of hope at the center of the chamber. It was a simple structure made of polished black stone, but there was an undeniable aura of power radiating from the object that rested upon it. The artifact, a small crystalline device, shaped like a jagged star, glowed with an eerie light, pulsing in time with the hum of the temple around them. "The artifact," Hawkins shouted. It's the source of the energy. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the power radiating from the artifact, a strange, almost magnetic pull drawing her toward it. But there was no time for hesitation. They had to secure it and get out. The group made a dash for the pedestal, ducking under a barrage of plasma fire as the Uivrian guards closed in. The entire room felt like it was closing in on them, the walls shifting and pulsing as though the temple itself was alive, fighting back. "We're not going to make it," Jenkins yelled, his shield barely holding against another incoming strike. "Yes, we will." Rachel snapped, her voice steely. "Keep moving." With a final, desperate surge, they reached the pedestal. Jenkins grabbed the artifact, and immediately, a burst of energy erupted from the crystalline object. It was as if the very air in the chamber had changed. A wave of force knocked them all back, sending them sprawling across the floor. The light from the artifact flared, and for a moment, the world seemed to shift. Time itself seemed to stretch and warp. Rachel's vision blurred, and she felt her mind pulse with strange new sensations. It was as if the artifact was communicating with her, its presence seeping into her very thoughts. She could feel the weight of centuries of knowledge, the power of the Uivrian Empire, and something darker beneath it all. But there was no time to think. "Captain, we need to move," Jenkins yelled, shaking her out of the strange trance. The Uivrian warriors were closing in, their glowing eyes narrowing as they prepared for another assault. Rachel's instincts kicked in, and she forced herself to her feet, grabbing the artifact from Jenkins' hands. "Let's go," she barked. They ran for the exit, the air crackling with tension. As they sprinted through the temple, the walls seemed to close in on them, the passageways shifting and bending in unnatural ways. The entire structure was coming alive, reacting to the theft of the artifact. But there was no turning back now. The artifact was in their hands, and the only way out was forward. Asterisk outside, the sky of Viroxia was a deep crimson, lit by the distant flashes of Uivrian warships engaging in the ongoing conflict above. Rachel's team emerged from the depths of the temple and into the harsh light of day. "We need to get back to the shuttle," Rachel ordered, breathless. But as they raced across the city, something felt off. The artifact's power thrummed in her hands, its energy growing stronger. It was no longer just a tool. It felt like a weapon, alive with potential. But what did it truly hold? Suddenly, a series of sharp explosions echoed through the streets, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Uivrians had found them. "Move!" Rachel shouted, instinctively shoving Jenkins forward. A Uivrian warship, far larger and more terrifying than any they had seen, descended from the sky, its weapons already primed. The air was thick with the sound of energy blasts, and a heavy sense of doom hung over them. "We're not going to make it," Hawkins yelled, eyes wide in fear. "We don't have a choice." Rachel snapped. "We fight." They stopped in their tracks, positioning themselves into a defensive formation. Rachel's heart pounded as she watched the warship's weapons charge, the Uivrians intent on making them an example. The artifact in her hands pulsed once again, and this time, the power inside it seemed to call to her. Without thinking, Rachel activated it. The artifact's glow intensified, and a shockwave of energy burst outward, sending ripples through the air and vibrating the ground beneath them. The warship's weapons faltered for a split second, the blast temporarily disabling its targeting systems. But the warship wasn't their only problem. The ground beneath them began to crack open, and the city's architecture began to crumble. Viroxia was shifting, and Rachel realized that the artifact's true power was far greater than she'd imagined. It could disrupt the entire city. "Get to the shuttle now," Rachel ordered, the urgency in her voice reaching new heights. The team bolted toward their extraction point, the ground beneath them shaking with each passing second. But even as they ran, Rachel knew this was just the beginning. They had the artifact, but now they had to survive what came next. The Uivrians would not let this theft go unpunished, and Earth's fate hung in the balance. The ground trembled beneath Rachel's feet as she sprinted, the artifact pulsating with raw, unpredictable energy in her hands. The entire city of Viroxia was shaking, its colossal structures creaking and cracking, as though the very foundations of the planet were being torn apart by the artifact's power. The once majestic skyline of the capital was now a crumbling nightmare, a landscape teetering on the brink of destruction. "Keep moving," Rachel yelled, her voice strained, the urgency in her tone cutting through the chaos around them. The team was struggling to keep pace. The shockwave from the artifact had disabled the Wyverian warship temporarily, but it wouldn't be long before they regained control. Rachel could already hear the faint sound of their engines roaring back to life in the distance, and behind them, the city itself seemed to be tearing itself apart in response to the artifact's activation. Jenkins stumbled, blood dripping from a cut along his arm. Hawkins, her eyes scanning the horizon, fired a few shots toward the oncoming Ivrian soldiers, but there were too many. The battlefield was shifting rapidly. Every second they delayed cost them precious time. "We're not going to make it," Hawkins muttered, her voice tense. "They'll overwhelm us before we reach the shuttle." Rachel's heart raced, but she refused to let fear overtake her. "Not if we make it a priority to destroy them first." She pushed forward, the weight of the artifact like a fire in her hands. It was drawing energy from somewhere deep inside Viroxia's core, and it was beginning to feel like the planet itself was about to explode. But there was no choice. If they didn't get the artifact back to Earth, the Ivrians would wipe out humanity, and the rest of the galaxy would fall in line. As they neared the extraction point, the air around them seemed to grow hotter. Explosions continued to rock the city, the once pristine streets now littered with debris and flaming wreckage. The shuttle was still there, hovering above the ground with its cloaking systems active, waiting for them. But before they could reach it, the ground split open. A massive figure emerged from the rift. A Ivrian general, towering over them, covered in black armor that seemed to shimmer with dark energy. He held a massive sword, crackling with power, and his eyes burned with fury. His presence alone was enough to freeze their movements. "You think you can steal from the Ivrians and live to tell the tale?" the general boomed, his voice deep and filled with contempt. Rachel barely had time to react. She instinctively raised her rifle and fired at the general, but the blast barely made a dent in his armor. The general's face twisted into a sneer. "You have no idea what you're holding," he continued, his voice vibrating with power. "The artifact you stole is more than just a weapon. It's a key, one that could unlock the ultimate destruction of your species." Rachel's mind raced. A key? To what? The general advanced, his footsteps shaking the ground beneath them. With a single swipe of his sword, he sent Jenkins flying backward. Hawkins opened fire again, but the shots ricocheted off the general's armor. Rachel's pulse quickened. The Ivrians had underestimated humanity, but now it felt as though the tables had turned in the worst possible way. "No," Rachel growled, gritting her teeth as she stood her ground. "We didn't steal anything. We took it to stop you. And we will stop you." The general raised his sword high, preparing for the final blow. But just as it came crashing down, the artifact in Rachel's hands flared with light, a blinding energy that pulsed out in all directions. The energy wave struck the general, knocking him back several paces. He roared in pain as his armor began to crack, the energy from the artifact seemingly cutting through his defenses. The general staggered but quickly regained his footing, his eyes now glowing with fury. "Foolish humans," he spat. "You don't understand. This artifact is not just a weapon. It's a catalyst for..." Before he could finish, the artifact flared again, its energy field expanding and contracting with a pulse of raw force. It was like a chain reaction. Something deep inside the artifact was resonating with the very core of Viroxia. The entire planet seemed to groan under the strain of the artifact's power. "No," the general shouted, his voice filled with terror now. "You don't understand what you're doing. Rachel's grip tightened around the artifact. She felt its power surging, felt the very atmosphere around her warping in response to it. She could sense the impending cataclysm, but it wasn't her fault. It wasn't their fault. The Uvrians had been the ones to unleash this weapon, to let it fall into their hands. The general charged again, but this time the artifact's power enveloped him. The ground trembled violently, and with a final deafening crack, the general was obliterated by the energy. His armor shattered, and his body disintegrated into a cloud of particles, vanishing in the wake of the artifact's destructive force. The team stood frozen in shock, watching as the power of the artifact reached its peak. The entire city of Viroxia began to implode, its towering spires crumbling into dust as the core of the planet began to destabilize. "Move!" Rachel screamed, snapping them all back into focus. "Get to the shuttle." They didn't have time to waste. The artifact had triggered something catastrophic, something they couldn't control. Viroxia was dying, and if they didn't escape now, they would be buried beneath its collapsing surface. With the Udvrian general gone, the remaining soldiers scattered, unable to stand against the power of the artifact or the rapidly collapsing city. Rachel and her team ran for the shuttle, their lungs burning as they pushed themselves harder than they ever had before. Behind them, Viroxia's skyline continued to crumble, the destruction spreading like wildfire across the surface. The shuttle's hatch opened just as the ground beneath them cracked open once again. They leaped inside, the engines roaring to life, and in a blur of motion, they shot into the sky. But as they soared away from the dying planet, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact's power had only just begun to reveal its true potential. Viroxia was gone, but the real battle was still ahead. The Uvrians had lost their home, but Earth was now in their sights, and humanity would need to face the consequences of what they had unleashed.